Na mô tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Na mô tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Na mô tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. Blessings. Good evening to you all. Very inspiring to hear you all chanting just now. Chanting paritas. Something that Buddhists have been doing ever since the time of the Buddha. 2,500 odd years, people have been chanting these same verses of protection, recollecting the goodness of the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha, practicing mindfulness in order to chant correctly and fully. You have to pay attention to what you're doing. If you stop chanting, then you're no longer mindful. And when you chant, what happens? It brings up great strength of mind, faith, confidence. Reminds us of the teachings, reminds us of the teacher, the Buddha, and the Dhamma and the Sangha. Even if you're very tired, you can chant and maybe overcome your tiredness. If you have a particular strong mood, negative emotion, you're afraid, you're worried, you're angry, you can chant and overcome that emotional state, chant until it's completely gone. So people have been doing this practice for all those years, whether as a group like you just did, or individually, when people are on their own, they chant. And it seems to connect the mind, the heart, the mind back to the Buddha and his teachings. That's one of the joys of practicing Buddhism in this day and age, even though we're a long time since the Buddha was alive. There still is a feeling of connection back to the Buddha, partly through chanting, partly through the existence of the texts, the suttas and the words of the Buddha, partly through the existence of Sangha, monks and nuns, ordained people, shaven their head, wearing the robes, the same, more or less the same robes as the time of the Buddha, same uniform. We call the robes the banner of the Arahants. All those well-known Arahants in the time of the Buddha, they wore these kind of robes, lived with shaved head, carried an alms bowl, practiced like we're practicing. Lay devotees supported them, listened to the Dhamma, practiced meditation, following those Arahants, just as we are. That's something to rejoice in, that the Buddhist teachings haven't disappeared from the world. They're still with us. That's our good fortune. That's our inheritance. We've inherited the teachings. We inherit the structural part of Buddhism, the places, the temples and monasteries, the Buddhist centers, physical locations. We inherit the Tripitaka, the texts, and we inherit the teachings and the ways of practice. again, that's something you can benefit from and learn when you come into a monastery like this. You become part of the Sangha for the day. My teacher, Ajahn Chah, used to emphasize the importance of the monastic training and discipline, even for lay people, to take part in it as a way of increasing their faith, their mindfulness, their determination, their effort. So when I first became a monk at Ajahn Chah's monastery, people would walk into the monastery. When they got to the front gate, they would take their shoes off and carry them, because that's how people practiced since the time of the Buddha, respecting the monastery grounds as sacred, as a place that is dedicated to the practice of the Dhamma for enlightenment, for the end of suffering. So even the pathways between the trees, it's just mud on the ground. The trees are just trees and plants. All of that is considered sacred and important place of respect. And of course, the Sangha members, they're people that we respect. And that's not, whether you like the person or not, the personality. It's the practice, the training, the precepts that they keep. And lay practitioners like yourselves coming into the monastery, when you're on retreat, keeping the 8 precepts, that's something to respect, to recognize. Most people in the world don't keep 8 precepts, maybe don't even keep 5 precepts. But somebody who's dedicated themselves to keep the 8 precepts for a day or a number of days or months even, that's something to recognize, to rejoice in, and to praise. So at Ajahn Chah's monastery, the 8 preceptors would sit at the front of the hall. Those lay people who came into the monastery maybe literally just for the day, to offer food or come and listen to a talk and then go home, they would sit behind. The 8 preceptors who were staying overnight for 1 or more nights would sit at the front. So the precepts took the lead, as it were. Whether you're male, female, rich, poor, whatever your sort of status in the world, wasn't the important thing. The VIPs were the 8 preceptors at the front, more than the VIPs in social terms, people well known in society for their position in government or money, business. It was the 8 preceptors who sat at the front, because the Dhamma came first, the Dhamma, the Vinaya. And that's one of the things that attracted me to Ajahn Chah's monastery when I first went there. It was clearly a place of practice for everyone, not just the monks and the nuns, but also the lay people. And there was an air of practice. You came into the monastery, there was a peaceful atmosphere. The monastery was fairly simple. There were simple buildings in those days, simple wooden huts to house the Sangha, very simple concrete meditation hall, concrete floor, concrete rendered walls, tin roof, very few mod cons and comforts in those days. But the air of practice was very tangible. It was a peaceful feeling. The paths were well swept. The kitchen was clean and quiet. So it seemed like a very suitable, conducive place to practice the Dhamma. People seemed to be practicing. They were restrained in the way they walked and talked. If they talked softly, and they didn't stand around engaging in a large amount of conversation. People would say whatever they needed to say, but it kept it brief, maybe. And the monks, after they came together for various activities like the meal or chanting or sweeping the leaves, then they would disappear and you wouldn't see them. And the place would be almost seem deserted, even though there would usually be quite a lot of people living there. If you walked around the monastery in the day or at night, you would encounter monks walking meditation up and down, practicing the recitation of Buddha or learning chanting, or they'd be in their kuti meditating if there wasn't a group meditation session. Some monks would be doing chores like cleaning the toilets, hauling water. In those days, there was no pipe water. Boiling dye made from the jackfruit tree wood to dye robes, clean robes. Simple tasks, but done quite quietly with a sense of attentiveness. The monks would pay attention to what they're doing. So my first impression was that the place was very conducive to practice. It's peaceful. And that highlighted whatever, say for me personally, going into that, it highlighted whatever was coming up in my own mind. It was my problem as opposed to other people's problems. When we're new to the practice, we often blur the lines. If you're feeling stressed or confused, or you have a particular mood, you're often saying it's because of this person or this situation. When you come into a place of practice in a monastery, then it shows you maybe the place is, you can't blame the place so easily. It's more your mind, isn't it? The problem is you. Thinking too much or getting attached to your views and opinions or your preferences. And a forest monastery, whether it was Ajahn Chah's monastery or other monasteries, they tend to be places that help you to see that. They help you to, it helps to highlight your own mental activity. And if you're experiencing any suffering, you get to know it, you get to see it. Because the outward environment is fairly ordinary, peaceful. So then you notice if you're upset or unhappy in some way, that's your own thinking, your own state of mind. And this is what the Buddha was encouraging. When we have a place of practice, we look after it and try to cultivate harmony and cooperation between the Sangha or the laity, so that then we can turn our attention inwards and we're not too caught up with external problems and issues, disagreements, differences of opinion. But we're actually able to follow a routine, keep the rules, follow the different practices of that place, but then turn our attention inwards. And we become more aware that if I'm suffering, it's me that's the problem. You become more aware of your own thoughts and feelings and take responsibility for them. I think that's one thing I learned quite quickly living with Ajahn Chah's Sangha, is that if I'm suffering, that's coming from me more than other people. And sure, when you live with other people, there'll always be a little bit of interaction, and sometimes that can give some friction or whatever, but really the emphasis is always about turning your attention back to yourself. Ajahn Chah himself said, when you're new to the monastic training or new to the practice of Buddhism, probably your number one obstacle will be what we call ditthi and mana. Ditthi means your views and the attachment to all the different views and opinions you have. And then mana is a sense of self, self-view. And sometimes we feel we're superior, better than others, sometimes the same as, sometimes worse than. But this combination can be quite potent. You attach to views and opinions of what you think are right, what you think is wrong, what the truth is, what the truth is not. And then with this sense of self combined together makes for the right mix for suffering. If you think you're right, you come into the monastery with your already you've got a whole collection of views and opinions and attitudes that you've collected from your life. And then you come into the monastery, well, you might want to do things in one way, but perhaps the monastery routine and the rules and the way things are done is different. Most people, when they came into the monastery, they were confronted with the rule that you get up with the morning bell. It was 3 a.m. the morning bell, and it's compulsory. You get up and you come and meditate and chant before dawn. So it's already something that would stimulate views and opinions. There'll always be someone saying, why do we have to get up so early? If I could sleep more, then my meditation will be better. Why can't we get up at 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock, whatever the reasonable suggestion you had? Most people kept their views and opinions under wraps, so they would think that, maybe just tell their friend, but not display the view and opinion very much. But it would be going on the inside, what we call the internal dialogue. So it may be in a negative vein. Why do we have to get up? Come and sit in a meditation hall. In the meditation hall, the windows were always open. There's no mosquito screen, so it was full of mosquitoes. The forest was very damp. So that might be another opinion. Why do we sit meditation with mosquitoes swarming around? Why don't we go somewhere where we can sit under a mosquito screen or away from this place that's full of mosquitoes? So that might be another opinion. Some monks probably hated mosquitoes, but as a monk, you can't kill them. I found that very useful in the long run, because it brought up irritation and those kinds of views and opinions would come up. But then I had no choice but to practice letting go, because what do you do if you're getting up early in the morning to go out and sit in a hall and you're being eaten alive by mosquitoes? You either learn to let go of your aversion, your opinions, or you sit there miserable, not only from the mosquitoes, but from your own negative states of mind that are plaguing you just as badly as the mosquitoes. So you can either sit there double dukkha, the dukkha of the mosquitoes and the dukkha of what you're thinking about them and your opinions about how the monastery should be set up so you don't have to have mosquitoes biting you. Or you have double wisdom. You let go of the mosquitoes and accept that they're just little creatures that live in the forest and there's not much you can do about them. And you accept, well, this is the monastery, this is how they run it. I'm new, I'll just have to go along with how they run the monastery and accept it. So you let go of that. So you get, instead of sitting there with double dukkha, you sit there with wisdom, double letting go. And maybe your mind, sooner or later, you get it, you understand it, and you let go, and your mind goes really peaceful. And the joke was always that when your mind goes peaceful, you stop fussing about the mosquitoes, you stop moving around, sweating, making a fuss, then the mosquitoes start to ignore you. Because they're always attracted by people who move a lot, sweat a lot, salt in the sweat, the smell. But when you become peaceful in your meditation, you let go of your views and opinions, you let go of your aversion to mosquitoes, then they actually let you go as well. They ignore you. That one simple understanding is so valuable, and you can use it in so many other areas of life. With other things you don't like, people and events and places. This is the value of monastic training, and particularly the way Ajahn Chah taught. He really taught us to see our minds, know our own minds in the situation, and just get to know what are the troublemakers, what are the causes of suffering, our attachment to views, opinions, the ego, the sense of self. That's where we suffer. And that's where we have to get to know our own suffering and see where it's coming from. And you see that in so many areas of the monastic life. At first, it's a bit of a crash course, so it can be quite confronting for many people. But over time, you start to learn and settle down and understand how to let go. Other things like food was another thing. Like the food at Ajahn Chah's monastery was really awful. Mainly because the people around, they were very poor. And who could criticize poor people who were still generous enough to offer food? They were very kind, but they were poor, so the quality of food was fairly basic. And then we had another practice. Often some of the food dishes were mixed together. So you got, a pot full of different kinds of curry all mixed together. And whoever was dishing out the food, because in those days it was dished out, you had a bowl, an alms bowl, and you didn't choose your food, it was placed into your bowl by other monks, and they dish it out and they just say, well, it all mixes in your stomach anyway, so it can mix in your bowl. And often the foreign monks had suffering because they often found chilies and spicy food challenging. They weren't used to it. And most of the food was very spicy, very chilly. And you had not much recourse. You just had to accept whatever they slop into your bowl. That's it, you get it. So you might get a dish that you like, a bit of curry, a spoonful of a curry or sweet or something that you like, and then suddenly a big slop of chili goes on top of it. It wasn't that anyone was deliberately trying to harm you or cause you suffering, but that's just the way it was. The food was given out. And actually, wherever you went in Thailand as a monk and you met other monks, it was one of the first things they would say is, oh, Ajahn Chah's monastery, yeah, I know that. The food is terrible. It's probably a lot better these days, a lot more choice, and now you can choose your own food, what you put in your bowl. In those days, you couldn't. In the most extreme reaction I saw once was a monk really couldn't face the meal that had been put into his bowl because it was just a mix of so many things all together. So he got so annoyed, he tipped his bowl upside down. And everyone was sorry for him, of course, but as a learning thing, you're learning that extreme aversion that comes up in a situation. How we attach maybe to our food and how we want things. We attach to conditions. Nowadays, there's much more comfort and convenience in the monasteries, but the principle is the same. And the same for the lay life. Where do we suffer easily in life? Well, probably when we start attaching to our views and opinions about our home, our family, our workplace, and then our country and our government and everything that we're involved with. We start forming views and opinions, which is okay. I mean, it's normal to do that, but then grasping them strongly, and then we get caught into feelings of, this is right, that's wrong, we've got to fix what's wrong, we've got to preserve what's right, I'm right, you're wrong. It energizes us, but it also causes a lot of suffering, doesn't it? A lot of suffering between people and even within an individual. You notice when you come to meditate, how many of your thoughts are based around things that you feel are unjust or wrong in your life, and this should be fixed, this should be better. The fault-finding mind, the complaining mind. As soon as you start meditating, you notice it, don't you? Sometimes it's relentless, the mind that's constantly nagging, complaining, this is not right, that's not right. And often over quite small things as well. Saying you come on a meditation retreat like this, it'll be, the temperature is too hot, too cold. My sitting mat is too hard, too soft. The place, the corner, I've seen people arguing over sitting mats before, saying, that's my corner, that's my space. No, it's not, it's my space. Views and opinions over how much we should chant, how much we should sit, how much we should walk, how long the talk should be, what the talk should be about. It's endless, isn't it? Even in a meditation retreat where we're dedicated to bringing up mindfulness and letting go of attachments. If there's anywhere in the world, that's the place you're doing it. And of course, out there in what we call the real world, which is actually not any different from in here, it's just different activities and different people, it's more intense, isn't it? Except for there's often not much room to maneuver. You go to work, you can't just start expressing all your opinions and views about how the office should be set up and what the supervisor or the manager should be doing and what your co-worker should be doing and how much work you should have or not have. As soon as you do that, you are in trouble, aren't you? You won't last very long, probably. And we don't, do we? Nowadays, people are moving between jobs so quickly. If you've been in your job for a year now, you celebrate. You become a veteran after 1 year. And you very rarely see someone who's been in the same job for 10 years. I've been in the same job for 40 years now. I'm doing well. It's like there's this voice inside always reacting to things. This is right, this is wrong. What's right, is what you like and what you agree with. What's wrong is what you don't like, don't agree with. So we're back to the feelings that prompt this sense of right and wrong, liking and not liking. It comes with feeling. As you meditate, you notice that there's physical feelings, pleasure and pain, and then there's mental pleasure and mental pain. And you associate what is right with mental pleasure, or that's right, and you feel good when you see something that you feel is right or good. When you see or witness something that's not right, there'll be some tension, some unpleasant feeling. If it's really strong, it comes out physically as well as mentally. There's strong pleasure and then strong pain, strong discomfort. As you become more aware of your body and mind as you meditate, you'll notice how we are prompted or triggered by feelings so much. usually we're caught up more in the views, the opinions, the trains of thought. But as your mind settles down, you become more aware. Then you notice how often feeling is prompting the train of thought or the opinion, the view that's coming up in your mind. And this is something to investigate, isn't it? As you become more aware, sitting, walking, you notice, say, if you have pain in your legs or your back, the trains of thought will start to reflect the attachment and the identification with that pain. So you tend to have more negative thoughts. Don't like this, don't want this. Maybe it even evolves into an opinion. Meditation is no good because it makes me have pain in the leg, makes me unhappy. Or maybe the opposite. Maybe you have no pain and you're feeling more peaceful and your body feels very relaxed, comfortable, more than usual. So you say, oh, this is a good place to meditate, or this is a good retreat. This is something to learn from, isn't it? How feeling triggers emotions and reactions, trains of thought. Painful feelings we tend to want to get away from. So we look for ways to get away from pain. We fantasize, we imagine, try to change the mood perhaps. Because on a retreat, there's very little distraction. There's very little in the terms of entertainment or other things to do. So you really have to face feelings of pleasure and pain and learn from them. You can't run away so easily. You can, but it's not so easy. And you notice how one way you react is, well, internally you run away, you create fantasy stories to pass the time when you're bored. Start thinking about other people, imagining, maybe you see someone, you don't know them, but you see another person, you start imagining who this person is, where they're from, their life story. If you ever actually meet them, you might find out it's totally wrong. It's just imagination. That's the way the mind operates. Its feelings trigger desire, attraction, aversion. Maybe you finish the retreat and you go home and you've been missing certain things that bring you pleasure. So, you have your favorite food or do your favorite activity for a while just to indulge and get the pleasure back after the retreat, because you feel like you deserve it because you've been going without for a while. If you're in a simple situation like a monastery or retreat, there's not a lot to indulge in. So very simple things their importance becomes magnified, doesn't it? So food and drink, say, if you're on a retreat or in a monastery, the meal becomes quite a big deal because you only get one meal a day. So it matters. Or if you have an evening drink, when I was a young monk, an evening drink would be a really big thing. Sometimes you didn't get one at all, and you always had water. It wasn't that you were dehydrated, but there was very little in terms of drinks, tea, coffee, fruit juice, these things. They were occasional. They weren't regular. And so when it did come around, you watch your mind sort of go up a bit, get elation, excitement. When I was a novice monk, we made the drink in a big kettle in the kitchen for the community, and we'd carry it over to a place where it'd be given out to the monks. But they didn't know what they were going to get because there's no labels and they didn't see the ingredients. So it's almost like a lottery. What's it going to be today? And then you see how the mind works. Once you get to know someone, you say that there's 2 or 3 novices or a layman making the drink over a period of days, even weeks. you get to know the style, don't you? So it's this guy, we're probably going to get this drink. So already your mind homes in on what you're expecting based on what you know about that person, what they've done before. And if you like their style of making drink, whatever it is, there may be, excitement. Oh, it's that guy making a drink. He's making a coffee or a cocoa or a juice. It's going to be really delicious. Okay. So already you're happy, maybe. And then some other guy always makes it wrong. Doesn't put the ingredients in right, not sweet enough, not salty enough, not this, not thick enough, not this enough. And so you see that guy making it, think, oh no. You haven't even tasted it, already the mind has gone there, hasn't it? It's created something out of it. And sometimes it's wrong. People surprise you, don't they? Sometimes the guy who makes the bad drink makes a good drink, or the guy who makes a good drink makes a bad drink, makes a mistake. It happens. Sometimes it would be a group effort and you get two novices. Maybe one would be a Western novice, more adult. One would be a teenage Thai novice with completely different views on what makes it a delicious drink. So you get one set of ingredients going in, and then you get another set going in, and they totally don't mix and don't go well together. And then the end result could be almost undrinkable. Or very occasionally it came out better than you thought. So usually when it came to coffee, the Thai novice would put in all the sugar, all the creamer he could find, and make it as thick and sweet as he could. And most people quite like that. So they'd say, "Well, I never had this before." But it just depended. If it's fruit juice, the Thais would sometimes put chili and salt in. And why is there chili and salt in an orange juice? Nowadays, people offer all kinds of things because the world economy has grown to the point where now you get, chocolate with chili in it. It's actually sold. In those days, it would be like a shock. It's like, oh, there's chili in the cocoa. Now it's actually sold as a product. But the thing is, you watch your mind, the expectation, the high, the elation, when you get what you want or better than what you want, the lows when you're disappointed, and all based around something as simple as one cup of drink. You're ready to destroy the world because your tea is ruined. Or you're ready to make friends with the world because you got this really nice drink. You see how your emotions are prey to something as simple as a drink, and whether it tastes good or not, or to your liking or not, or somebody else likes it, you don't. And why is that? Human beings are different, aren't they? They have their different preferences. But when it is reduced down to very simple things like a meal or sitting in a hall like this, and how you're sitting, whether you have a cushion or not, whether there's mosquitoes or not, these sort of very simple things bring up a lot of emotions, and you form views and opinions, and you see the suffering and how it's triggered. Feeling arises, sometimes pleasant feeling, sometimes painful feeling, and then trains of thoughts, emotions. Maybe they're elaborated, the imagination kicks in, and you can make a whole drama or a whole mood around something vaguely pleasant or vaguely unpleasant, but you create it into something much bigger. You add on attachment with craving and attachment. This is what the Buddha sort of explained. The very profound central teaching of Buddhism we call dependent origination, the way different things arise dependent, one thing arises dependent on another. So craving arises dependent on feeling, pleasant feeling, one kind of craving, unpleasant feeling, another kind of craving. Dependent on craving, attachment arises, clinging arises. You might say that's the repeated arising of craving becomes an attachment. And that gives rise to becoming. You become a certain way, it defines who you are and what you seek in life, create your world based on craving and attachment. Out there in what we call the real world, jobs, family, all these things, it's quite hard to see this at work. It's so much, it's so complex. But in a retreat situation, you have a chance to really focus in on your mind and see some of these patterns and see how craving and attachment arise. And you've got maybe a good opportunity to learn about yourself. And it's not always necessarily that one thing is right or wrong. It's more just seeing how the process works so you can understand if you are suffering, where's it coming from? Feelings arise in us. Craving arise based on feeling arise in you, in each one of us. Clinging and becoming arise within you. This is not other people. Other people may be involved with you and trigger things, but the actual feeling, craving, clinging, becoming, and then suffering is in you, isn't it? So you have to solve that within yourself. That's why we're here. That's why we're listening to the Dhamma, practicing meditation. Nobody else can really solve it. They can help, of course. We can get words of encouragement. We can get support in different ways from others, particularly from teachers. We get good example. We get explanations. But in the end, you have to learn from yourself. If you're suffering, you're going to have to investigate that, find out what's going on. That's why we come and practice meditation, is to learn, to look, to learn. That's why we need to develop this quality of mindfulness. It's a basic kind of principle. We develop mindfulness, clear comprehension, sati sampajanya, and then wisdom based on investigation, looking, learning, observing. These are the qualities we're developing so we can look back at our own mental experience and see how suffering arises and then how to abandon it, how to let it go. We can't do it simply by requesting from Buddha or God or somebody, or praying, or asking for the blessing. Just before this, somebody sent me this picture of the Buddha. It's made with artificial intelligence. Now you can make any kind of picture with artificial intelligence. And the Buddha is sitting there with his head on his hand because another person has come, asked for a blessing. And while he's blessing them, wishing them to cultivate the Dhamma for the end of suffering, they're saying, what are they saying? They're saying, may my child become rich without having to do anything. We're always wanting something. We want our children to be rich. We want ourselves to be rich. We want to get the job. We want to get this, get that. What we call meditation and Dhamma practice and blessing so much is just wanting stuff and hoping that somehow the monk will give it to you. Whatever your suffering is, whatever you're missing or lacking, it's, can the Buddha give it to me? Can this monk give it to me? If you get what you want, then that monk must be really good. Whether that's really the cause for getting what you want, or maybe there's other things, your own actions, your own karma, your own efforts, that's probably more likely to be the case. So when we come on a retreat like this, we're upgrading, we're now maturing our efforts to really look and learn what leads to what. We're not just asking for the Buddha. I mean, it may play a small part in our practice. We chant, we remember the Buddha, we recollect teachers, the qualities of the Buddha, the qualities of these teachers. That is part of our practice, but you can't free yourself from suffering simply by asking for it or wanting it. You've got to look into the cause and effect, the process. It's the only way you can do it, isn't it? Understand, where is this suffering coming from? And usually the simple answer is, what are you attaching to? where you're attaching is where the suffering is being generated. If you're attaching to a sense of self, an opinion, view, a belief, you're going to find some suffering there. Even a good opinion that may be correct in one sense can become suffering, can't it? When you feel you're right and then someone challenges it, you may get angry. So maybe you have the opinion the Buddha is a good teacher, an enlightened teacher. You want to follow the Buddha, fine. And then someone comes along and says, oh, Buddha didn't know. Buddha's wrong. And maybe you get angry. The anger is not because the Buddha is right or wrong. It's because of your feeling that arises based on your clinging to that particular view, the identity, the belief. So even something very good can still cause us suffering if we cling to it wrongly. More often than not, it's more ordinary things, isn't it? Like whether the drink is made well or not. If you go to the Starbucks or the Coffee Bean and you get a bad cup of coffee, it's like, I paid my money, they should make a better cup of coffee than this. It'd be more ordinary things like that, probably. Nevertheless, even something as profound as your religious beliefs, your views on what is right and wrong in life can cause you suffering. Even if you're sure you're right, you can be wrong. Even if you think something is true, it can still be incorrect and wrong if you're grasping it wrongly. It can become a poison or a punishment, can't it? Say sometimes on retreats, people are trying to be very disciplined, put effort into their practice, and that's good. And then maybe there's two people over there talking a lot, too much, too loud. Suddenly we're dealing with our anger because we hear a sound. Then we have a view. This is a retreat. Everyone should be very mindful, very careful, not speaking too much. But then two people are not paying attention to that, or they don't know. So we get anger, even on a meditation retreat. And then maybe someone else sees you getting angry or hears your complaint and says, oh, they should be peaceful. They're on a meditation retreat. What are all these people meditating getting angry for? On it goes. So even meditation retreats are not immune from this because we've all got a human mind which can create suffering out of almost anything. This is the kind of thing we're investigating, where suffering arises, observing the craving, the clinging, which manifests usually as a sense of self, pride. Maybe you meditate, you put a lot of effort into your meditation for a while and you get quite calm, peaceful, your mindfulness is good. And then later on, somebody comes by and says, oh, you're just wasting your time. You have hurt pride or hurt ego, or you're disappointed with that person. But that's part of the practice as well, the views and opinions of other people, just as we have to learn to navigate our own views and opinions, not cling to them too tightly, not let them become a cause of suffering in our own mind. Then you realize, well, other people are doing the same thing. They'll do the same thing. They'll have their opinion, and maybe their opinion is different than ours. So when they express it, maybe it will stimulate disappointment, annoyance, anger. But the more you understand this, you say, oh, they're also suffering from this thing. You're clinging too tightly to their thoughts, their views and opinions, their feelings, just as I am. But they're going to have to sort that out for themselves. I can't do it. I'm going to sort it out for myself. So you come back to yourself, don't you? And this is one part of the practice. Say when you notice something you feel is a fault or a weakness in another person, in the end, you can't do a lot about that. If it was someone really close to you, maybe you have a child, maybe you can teach them, explain them what is what. But majority of people, it's not really your role or your job to teach them and change them. They're going to have to do that for themselves. But what you can do is turn around and say, oh, you've seen this in someone else. Do I have this? Do I think like this? Do I act like this? And you can learn that way. And if you've seen something inappropriate, unskillful in another person, You can look back at yourself and say, do I do this? If I do, how can I change this? Can I abandon this way of behavior that I found in myself or in another person? That's like establishing sila. We take sila at the beginning of the day as a chant, and that's a good thing. And we commit to keeping precepts. But that's not the end of the story, is it? Keeping precepts means you're reflecting on your speech, your actions through the day, day by day. And sila is really qualities that arise in the mind, right speech, right action, wholesome, skillful speech, skillful action. They're internal. The undertaking of precepts in a ceremony can be very helpful, but then you have to internalize that determination to refrain from killing, stealing, arguing, fighting, whatever. That has to be internalized through your practice until it's just normal for your mind not to throw up those intentions because you've thought it through, you've learned that that's not the way out of suffering. So even when we encounter other people's suffering, we can learn. Sometimes it's quite hard, but we can learn from others. We can learn from ourselves. And the Buddha was encouraging us to use these opportunities to develop more awareness, more mindfulness, and reflect back on ourselves to see where suffering is coming. Could be just arguments over a cup of tea or coffee. It could be debates and deeper arguments over, the nature of reality and what is self, what is not self. It doesn't matter. Wherever there's craving, clinging, there'll be attachment, there'll be suffering. And that's a pattern that's going on in our minds all the time. So we can use it to gain understanding, to investigate, and hopefully to gain more freedom from some of the attachment. Maybe for tonight, I'll just say this much, because tomorrow is another day. We'll have more chance to discuss the Dhamma. But is there a Q&A session, or are we finishing here tonight? There is. We're okay, so we'll be finishing here for tonight.
หันธรรมยามโอวาทกถาสาธุกะรังกะไดมาเสสาธุสาธุสาธุอนุโมทามิ